Hello, everybody, and welcome to an interesting little video. My name is Ark. If you've never met me before, then, hey, how's it going? If you have, this is a bit of a break in the action to things that I normally talk about. So, for some of you that may be in the YouTube Pokemon sphere, there is a video circulating right now from an account called EliteZee, where he gives legendary Pokemon different signature abilities. So if you guys haven't watched that video, I encourage you to go check it out. He comes up with some really crazy ideas. And he prefaces in the video that the abilities are not really balanced, So I thought it would be a fun idea to take it upon myself to try and take those abilities or take those legendaries and give them an ability that's more balanced or more intuitive to competitive play. So these are just going to be my ideas on some of the main legendaries throughout the course of the games. I hope you guys enjoy, and let me know what you guys think in the comments. Well, let's get right into it. So let's get started with everyone's favorite OG legendary, Mewtwo. Mewtwo has two abilities, the patented Pressure, which is pretty useless to the Mon's playstyle, and Unnerve, which isn't a bad ability, but I'm sure we can give it something better. After some thought, I came up with two ideas. The first is the ability Genetic Shift, which reads, the user alters its own DNA in order to prevent taking super effective damage. Multiple Pokedex entries for Mewtwo mention the fact that various forms of gene splicing and DNA engineering were used to make Mewtwo into the ultimate battle machine. Through research, it only makes sense that science would be able to overcome the issue of type matchups. Thus, Mewtwo's genetic code allows it to have at least neutral matchups with any Pokemon it faces. Along the same lines, I also came up with the ability Encoder, which is an extension of the thoughts I just mentioned. Encoder allows Mewtwo to read the genetic structure of its opponent, which, in turn, allows it to land its moves regardless of type immunities. Dark-type Pokemon are some of the biggest counters to Mewtwo, so this would allow Mewtwo to still be able to hit them with Psychic-type attacks. Now let's move on to our favorite bird Pokemon from Gen 2, Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh, like Mewtwo, possesses two abilities, and one of them, of course, is Pressure. However, its other ability, Regenerator, is pretty solid in competitive play and allows Ho-Oh to pivot out and recover some of its HP. Some of the abilities that these Pokemon have are inherently good and don't really need changing, but I went and did it for every one of them anyway, so without further ado, I introduce you to Purifying Flame. Purifying Flame is like an upgraded version of the Shed Skin ability, which allows Ho-Oh a 50% chance to heal its status conditions at the end of each turn. The Pokedex entry for Ho-Oh states that Ho-Oh only shows itself to trainers that are pure of heart and promises eternal happiness and good health to those who see it. I ran with this idea and thought it made sense for Ho-Oh to also have some concept of purity, which it can use to its advantage. Next up is Lugia, and boy, do I have so many ideas for this one. Lugia possesses the abilities Pressure, go figure, and Multiscale, which makes it incredibly difficult to take down. However, I'd really love for Lugia to have an ability that can help its offensive presence a bit more. So I came up with three separate abilities for it based yet again on its Pokedex entries. The first ability is called Guardian of the Sea. There are multiple dex entries that talk about how Lugia lives at the bottom of a deep sea trench in order to prevent destruction since it's so powerful. In fact, Lugia's wings flapping have been known to cause storms on their own. So I thought we could take things the simple route and give Lugia a 10% boost to its flying and water type moves to correspond to it. An alternative idea I thought for this ability was simply to give Lugia stab on its water type moves, but I thought this was okay too. Next up, we have Eye of the Storm. While Lugia is known to cause storms, it is also said to be able to calm them as well, giving it complete control over the weather amongst the seas. Because of this, I thought having an ability similar to Rayquaza's Airlock could be quite good. And finally, the third ability, which is Stormbringer, which reads, when this Pokemon uses a flying type move, the effects of Drizzle begin. Still building off previous dex entries, there have been plenty of stories where one flap of Lugia's wings have caused typhoons that have lasted over 40 days long. So I thought by using a flying type move such as Aeroblast or Hurricane, it could stir up a storm system and get the rain pouring. I had a lot of fun with this one, so I hope you enjoy at least one of these options. Now let's move on to my personal favorite Gen 3, starting with Groudon. Gen 3 legendaries have abilities that impact the weather, and Groudon's ability Drought sets up Sunny Day for a total of 5 turns. I figured a cop-out to this ability would be to make it better and give Groudon Desolate Land, but it felt like a bit much, so I came up with the following two options. The first one is my lesser favorite of the two, which is Magma Plating, which allows Groudon to only take 3 force damage from physical moves. Groudon's Pokedex entries talk a lot about how it has raised entire continents using magma it finds underground. By using this magma, I thought Groudon should be able to bolster its already stellar defenses. However, I felt this ability strayed from the sun too much, so I came up with Seething Sun. Seething Sun is entirely identical to Drought, but also gives Groudon the added bonus of having the Flame Body effect, which has a chance to burn Pokemon if they come into contact with it. Again, Groudon's dex entry states that it can evaporate water with the immense heat radiating from its body. So naturally Groudon is pretty hot to the touch, so it only makes sense that it has a chance to burn you. Next up is my favorite legendary Pokemon, Kyogre. Kyogre possesses the Drizzle ability, which sets up the effects of Rain Dance. This ability is already great and helps many other Pokemon find success, boosting their water-type moves. So how do we take an already great ability and make sure we don't blow it out of proportion? Well, the solution I decided to come up with was Shifting Tides. This ability is identical to Drizzle, but improves the accuracy of water-type moves by 10%. It's a pretty niche change, but it can allow moves such as Aqua Tail, Hydro Pump, Muddy Water, and Whirlpool to hit more effectively. Kyogre brings torrential downpours, making it nearly impossible to get away from the rain, so this increased accuracy makes sense to me. I'm not totally sold on the idea though, and I definitely think it could include something else. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Next is our final Gen 3 legendary, Rayquaza. Rayquaza has the ability Airlock, which it uses to suppress the effects of weather and calm the feud between Kyogre and Groudon. But to me, this ability always felt a little lackluster. So here's introducing Roaring Skies. Like Kyogre and Groudon's abilities, this also follows suit with Airlock. However, it gives an extra bonus of setting up Tailwind effect for 4 turns the first time Rayquaza switches into the battle. Pokedex entries explain that Rayquaza is incredibly fast and looks like a meteor flying through the night sky. This speed isn't shown in the Pokemon's actual base stat, so I actually felt it appropriate to give it a little boost with this new ability. Now it's time to roll into Gen 4 with Palkia. Palkia has 2 abilities in Pressure and Telepathy, which in many cases are both fairly useless. So I really want to give these Mons abilities that embody their lore in the games. I actually decided on some new ideas that I found from a YouTube user, Rafanobi, in EliteZee's comment section for these next 2 guys, so shout out to him for the creativity. Palkia's new ability is Spatial Distortion. This new ability allows Palkia to augment the space around it, applying the gravity effect for 5 turns the first time it comes into the battle. This grounds all Pokemon, nullifies the ability Levitate, and makes all moves more accurate, which can drastically benefit its Draco Meteors and Hydro Pumps. I thought this was a really cool idea, and it's very rare that you ever see the move Gravity in competitive, so it's fun to give it some love here. Next is Palkia's counterpart, the God of Time himself, Dialga. Dialga has the same abilities as Palkia, and I took its new ability in a similar route. Shout out to Rafanobi once again, as we have the new ability, Time Warp. Rafa's ability for Time Warp is actually the second option here, which allows Dialga to set Trick Room the first time it enters the field, messing with the flow of time by reversing priority of moves, which I thought was really interesting. However, I've always been interested in Dialga's move Roar of Time, and it's really sad that it's never really used. So in order to make it useful, an alternative idea would be to make 2-turn moves, and moves that require a turn to recharge no longer have those requirements. I'll admit though, if this was the case, I'd likely suggest nerfing the power of Roar of Time to compensate for Dialga's ability to start spamming it, but I thought it was a really fun idea. We still have 2 more Sinnoh legends to cover, and the first one is the God of the Underworld, Giratina. Giratina, like its counterparts before it, also has the abilities Telepathy and Pressure, so I came up with 2 new ideas that I think are really cool. The first is the ability Distortion, which I'll admit seems pretty bad, and it's pretty interesting in my opinion. The ability distorts Giratina's type chart, making its resistances and weaknesses reversed. So now Fairy and Dragon moves become less effective, and many other types become more effective. Giratina is said to come from the Distortion world, a world where common knowledge is distorted, strange, and seemingly the reverse side of our world. So I thought it would be cool to reflect that change. The second idea is a little more simple, and I like it just a little bit more, and that is the ability Lingering Shadow. I'm a big fan of the ability Aftermath, and this is a step up from that reads, when this Pokemon faints, the curse effect afflicts the opposing Pokemon and cannot be removed even if the Pokemon switches out. Giratina is a Pokemon based on the devil in the underworld, so having an ability that builds on its connection to the shadowy curses felt pretty appropriate. This way, Giratina assures that with enough time, its adversary joins it in the afterlife. On a lighter note though, let's talk about the Pokegod himself, Arceus. As we know, Arceus has the ability Multi-Type, which allows it to change its type into whatever it wants depending on the plate it's holding. Now there's a lot of ideas that could involve the god of all Pokemon, but we needed to keep some semblance of balance here. So I took a very simple and arguably a little boring approach, but it makes sense to me. and that is the ability called Godly Gift, which gives Arceus stab on all of its moves regardless of its typing. Arceus is the god of Pokemon and the universe's supreme being, and the plates help Arceus change its defensive typing. But would it make sense for it to be able to use all of its moves to its fullest potential? I think so. So let me know if you have any other ideas for Arceus, because this one feels like it's missing something. We're halfway there, and now we get to talk about the Gen 5 Legendaries, starting with Zekrom. Zekrom has the ability Terravolt, which sounds super badass until you realize it's basically just Mold Breaker. So how do we make this a little more interesting? Well, the answer I came up with was Draconic Charge. When Zekrom uses a tail move, it gains the charge effect until the end of its next turn, which means it gets a temporary boost to its special defense, and its next electrical attack is doubled. Additionally, the move Dragon Tail now has a 30% chance to paralyze. I decided on this unique ability because Zekrom's Pokédex entry talks extensively about how it stores electrical energy in its tail and that it behaves like a giant generator. By utilizing its tail, it's only natural that that surge of power can be released. This can be accomplished by using the aforementioned Dragon Tail or by using the move Tailwind. I'm not really sure how balanced something like this can be, and it feels pretty niche, but I really like how unique it can be. Next up is Zekrom's counterpart, Reshiram, which also has an ability called Turbo Blaze, which again is basically Mold Breaker. You probably already know what's going to happen here, so let me introduce you to the ability Draconic Flame, which gives Reshiram the Flash Fire effect after using a tail move. Additionally, Dragon Tail now has a chance to burn. Reshiram also stores energy in its tail in the form of intense heat, so it only seems appropriate that by using its tail, some of that energy can be of use. Our final Gen 5 compadre is Kyurem. Kyurem really got the shaft and only has pressure, so anything we give it is going to be an upgrade. So I decided on the ability Frost Body. Like Static and Flame Body, making contact with Kyurem poses a 30% chance of contracting a status effect. In this case, I went with Frostbite. One of the best things to come out of Pokemon Legends Arceus was the Frostbite status, which functions as a burn that deals damage each turn but halves the power of special attacks rather than physical, which is infinitely better than Freeze, by the way. Kyurem's Pokédex entry states that it has been generating a powerful freezing energy inside its body, and that its body became frozen when the energy started to leak out. Because of this, we can assume that Kyurem is still leaking this incredibly cold power, which makes it dangerous for opposing Pokemon to touch. Next up, we have the VGC Terror Xerneas himself, hailing from Generation 6. Its normal ability is Fairy Aura, which simply increases the power of Fairy-type moves by 33%, which seems right, but a little bit boring. So we're going to do something really strange here. Let me preface this by saying that this is probably one of my least favorite answers I came up with, regardless of how different it is, but I still think it has potential. Xerneas' new ability here is Aspect of Life. When Xerneas is hit by a move, its life aura begins and lasts for 5 turns. Aura functions similarly to a terrain effect, but it's its own mechanic for purposes of this video. I thought Fairy Aura could combine with some aspects of grassy and misty terrain, which tie into Xerneas being a Pokemon based on the Tree of Life. While Life Aura is active, Fairy and Grass type moves are boosted by 20%, and Pokemon gain the Leftovers effect, which heals 1/16 of their HP at the end of each turn. It's kind of a weird concept, I know, but please bear with me. Next up is the antithesis to life, which is Yveltal. Yveltal's normal ability is Dark Aura, which boosts Dark-type moves by 33%, which again makes sense, but it's not what we're going to settle on. So let me introduce you to Aspect of Death. A bit grim on the naming, but Yveltal is the exact opposite of Xerneas, meaning that it saps the life force from everything it touches. Because of this, when Pokemon make contact with Yveltal, a Leech Seed effect is applied to them, which allows Yveltal to absorb some of its HP at the end of each turn. Pretty simple ability, but quite effective if you ask me. Then we have our favorite cellular buddy, Zygarde. Zygarde's normal ability Aura Break cancels out both Fairy and Dark Aura and reduces the power of the moves. So I think I have an idea for a new ability here, and that is Maintain Order. Zygarde is known as the Order Pokemon, and its Pokédex entries speak of how Zygarde monitors the ecosystem and maintains its balance while eliminating those that try to endanger it. So this new ability, Maintain Order, will remove all weather, terrain, aura, trick room, and other special effects from the battlefield. Zygarde provides balance for all and eliminates extra conditions it deems unfit to persist, so this could be a really fun momentum breaker if played in the right spot. I had also considered having this ability remove all hazards from the battlefield, but having a Pokemon that is basically defog on a stick seemed a little too good. Now it's time for Gen 7 Legendaries, which in my opinion deserve a little more love than they get, especially my boy Solgaleo. Solgaleo's original ability, Full Metal Body, is basically just a reskinned Clear Body. However, I wanted its new ability to match up with its lore more consistently. So we have the new ability, Radiance. Radiance allows Solgaleo to only take neutral damage from Dark-type moves instead of super effective damage, and boosts its Fire-type attacks by 20%. Solgaleo's Pokédex entries explain that it is a beast that devours the literal sun. It radiates light from the surface of its body and lights up the night sky. Because of this, I found it appropriate for Solgaleo to be able to utilize the power of the sun more effectively through its Fire-type moves and be less susceptible to darkness. I went back and forth between 10 and 20% for the Fire-type buff, so let me know which one you think is better. Next up, we have another one of my personal favorites, Lunala. Lunala's ability Shadow Shield is just like Multiscale, allowing it to halve damage it takes when it's at full HP. This really helps its 4 times weaknesses to both Ghost and Dark, but I have something more on par with its backstory. And that is the ability Full Moon, which appropriately increases the efficiency of moves with Moon in their name. This means that the moves Moongeist Beam and Moonblast will receive a 20% buff in damage, and the move Moonlight will now heal for 60% rather than the usual 50%. It will also not be affected by negative weather conditions that would normally reduce the amount of HP recovered. In the Pokédex, Lunala is known as the beast that calls the moon, and is basically the moon itself. It only makes sense that Lunala should be able to harness its power and give itself some benefits as it devours light and draws a dark veil over the brightness of day. Our final Gen 7 Legendary is Necrozma, our favorite little alien. Necrozma's ability Prism Armor nerfs super effective damage to just 3/4 its normal damage, which allows Necrozma to live a little bit longer. However, I think there are 2 new abilities that could be really fun. The first is known as Plasma Blaster. In the Dex, it is stated that by using light as its energy source, Necrozma is constantly firing off laser beams with a vicious disposition. Because of this, I thought it would be cool to give all of its beam moves a 20% boost in damage. Apart from that, I also came up with the ability Ignition, which is similar to Solar Power, but rather than the Pokemon losing 10% of its HP at the end of each turn, the Pokemon's moves now gain a 33% recoil damage effect. Necrozma survives by absorbing light and goes on literal rampages seeking it out. Losing light energy causes Necrozma to darken and eventually stop moving as well, so I thought it would be cool for Necrozma to utilize the ultimate light source, the sun. I figured it would be interesting for Necrozma to be bursting at the seams with all that solar power, making it an incredibly reckless yet efficient offensive threat. Now we're finally to Gen 8, and our first culprit is Zacian. Zacian has the ability Intrepid Sword, which gives it a raise to its attack stat once per battle on Switch-In, but let's beef up the lore a little bit and give it a new ability called Hero's Forge. Its Pokédex entry states that the Pokemon can absorb metal particles and transform them into a weapon it uses for battle. Based on this, it makes sense that if Zacian is struck with a Steel-type move with metallic properties, that it can use those particles to fire off a counterattack. So Zacian now receives only 3/4 damage from super effective Steel-type attacks, and when struck by one, boosts its next move to 50%. I couldn't really think of anything else to give Zacian, but this seems like an interesting way for it to be not quite as broken as it was before. Although I'm not totally sold on giving it more defensive longevity against one of its few weaknesses, but we'll see. Oh well. Next up is Zamazenta. Like Zacian, Zamazenta's ability Dauntless Shield also gives it a stat boost once per game on Switch-In, but this time to its defense. So to no one's surprise, I did just the same thing here and gave Zamazenta the ability Guardian. Zamazenta also is said to use metal particles in battle, so if Zamazenta is hit by a Steel-type move, it will boost the user's defense by 1 stage. This Pokemon will also only take 3/4 damage from Steel-type attacks. The dogs are such a weird duo when it comes to abilities, and I feel like I could have been a lot more creative rather than just giving something based on a dex entry, so we might come back to these guys in the future. Last but not least, we have the giant Pokemon Eternatus. Eternatus is yet another victim of the pressure bug, so let's give it a new ability called Power Core, which reads, this Pokemon steals any stat increases from a Pokemon that it KOs in battle. So it kind of functions like a Moxie Boost or a Psych Up depending on how you look at it. Eternatus's Pokédex entry states that it absorbs immense amounts of energy through its core on its chest from the entire Galar region, making it quite powerful. Because of this, I thought it would be interesting for the same kind of energy absorption to apply to Pokemon that Eternatus manages to defeat in battle. And there you have it, new abilities for the main legendaries from Gens 1 through 8. I didn't take the time to do the Gen 9 legendaries because both of their abilities are pretty insane already, and I'm not really sure on how I would change them. So your task is to tell me what you would give Miraidon and Koraidon in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, as it was a pretty fun one to make. Now, I'd like to preference this just one last time that these are just my opinions, and I know that some of these abilities are still much too good, but I thought it was a good step to take in the right direction and could provide for some fun discussion. So I hope you guys liked it. Like, subscribe, do all of the YouTube stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.